to his earlier statement that if you're an ordinary Singaporean, you will also benefit. I think not quite true.
You are going to benefit in some way, even if you're not directly involved in the F&B industry or the services industry catering to F1, because there is the multiplier effect, and all of the spending that is coming to Singapore for the event, it should trickle through to the rest of the economy in some way. So that's when if you spend $1, for example, on restaurants or accommodation in Singapore, then that dollar gets translated downstream to a lot more spending on local suppliers, local supply chain, workers in the Singapore economy, and so on and so forth. So the objective, in theory, of winning these kinds of big events is to bring the money to Singapore, spend money on goods and services in Singapore, and then have a multiplier effect to boost the local economy. But in reality, it's going to be a bit more complicated. A lot of it depends on how big is the local supply chain that the event is actually going to tap on. So if you look at an event like F1, right? Sure, of course, they're going to spend money on local hotels, local F&B, local services. But when you look at a very big part of it, the cars, the mechanics, the spare parts, I doubt that much of that is going to be sourced locally. They basically bring along their entire sophisticated, F1 car supply chain along with them everywhere they go. So we have to be realistic. What will be spent locally? What will not be spent locally?
Now, I'd like to add on a few points here. I think we need to be able to distinguish between positive spillover effects and the multiplier process. So when you have an event like F1, the positive spillover effects is basically the fact that people are coming in here and they're not only just paying for the F1 ticket. They're going to be coming here to spend on accommodation. They're going to be coming here to spend on F&B, other forms of entertainment, shopping, transport, etc. So that's the positive spillover effects. It is a kind of a positive externality to other sectors of the economy. Then, in addition, there is the multiplier process or the multiplier effect that he talks about. And that's true. But we need to also qualify this where Singapore is concerned. There is the known theory that Singapore actually has a rather small multiplier size because we are an economy with a lot of leakages. For example, imports. Therefore, overall, the positive effects of F1 tourism may be a little bit more limited than one expects, but I guess it is better to have some than not to have any, right? I would also like to note, especially for economic students, that this kind of spending, you have to link it to exports. The tourists coming in, they're spending on goods and services in Singapore, but don't link it to the consumer expenditure component of the aggregate demand because they are not households, they are foreigners. So this type of spending is recorded under exports. So you must be linking it to the net export component of the aggregate demand when you are doing all your analysis. Let's watch on.
Then we also have to consider who's going to win locally and who will not be so well off locally. So you look around us today, right, in the Marina Bay area, there are going to be some businesses here who will benefit because they're catering to the international tourists. But there are also businesses here who will regret the F1 being held here because they cater more to domestic spenders, to locals, and they're going to say, well, the locals are going to avoid this area because of all of the traffic congestion and poor transport and so on during that week. So you can see that even within this area, which is right next to where the F1 circuit is going to be held, there are likely going to be winners and losers as well.
Now, there are a lot of points there actually. So first and foremost, he's right. There are winners and losers. And I think I would also add to the fact that this is like a negative externality, negative spillover effect on certain sectors, on certain firms. And we should also consider the negative externality imposed on the commuters, those who need to travel to that area, including workers. Is going to be inconvenient now for them. There are going to be road closures, certain bus routes and so on are going to be diverted. I would also like to add three other very important points which he did not capture. Number one, because there are winners and losers, so there is a bit of a question mark over whether such strategies to boost economic growth is inclusive because it doesn't really benefit everyone. And that also brings me to his earlier statement that if you're an ordinary Singaporean, you will also benefit. I think not quite true, precisely because there are winners and losers. Secondly, because the multiplier effect, as I shared earlier, is actually quite small. And so this rippling effect across the economy is actually going to be quite limited. Then, if the growth is not very inclusive, it's still not a bad thing, not necessarily a bad thing, provided there are distributional mechanisms. But what are the distributional mechanisms, for example, in this case? Then, two more very important points I think we have to take into account is actually where the F1 economics is concerned, it is not about the here and now. It is not just about the influx of tourists during F1 season. It is really about building a reputation, of being a very vibrant, exciting, global city. Because there are F1 audiences all over the world. So it's going to put Singapore in their minds, it's going to put Singapore on the map of thriving, vibrant global cities and so on. So it is meant to not only just create tourism value today, but long-term tourism value. And I think that could be even more significant, which is basically you can draw in even more tourists in the coming years, even more investments in the coming years, maybe global talents who would like to come here, live, work, play, etc. So these are very substantial benefits that we need to realize as well. Having said all that, guess what? To bring in F1, it is also a cost to government. It is also a cost to taxpayers. I don't have the numbers, but we have to pay a X amount of subsidy to the F1 organization, right, to cut a deal with them to hold the F1 race in Singapore. So the cost of doing that and the opportunity cost of doing that as well also has to be considered. All right. So with that, I hope all you economics students will get a boost about understanding F1 economics. See you in class. Ciao.